Chapter 1, The Quiet Experiment. Taylor Kellus noticed the silence on a Tuesday, which bothered him more than if it had arrived on a Friday. Fridays were symbolic. Tuesdays were just honest. He was standing in his kitchen, one sock on, one sock missing, coffee cooling in a mug he'd forgotten to drink from. His phone lay face up on the counter, screen dark, accusing in its stillness. No new messages. Not from Sheila. That wasn't unusual by itself. Sheila Cray texted him several times a day. Good mornings, memes, half-formed thoughts, updates about work frustrations or what she was thinking of ordering for dinner. The volume hadn't changed. The timing hadn't changed. The content had. Taylor slid the sock drawer closed with more force than necessary and leaned back against the counter. He exhaled slowly, the way he did when a circuit diagram didn't make sense yet, but he knew it eventually would. You're not imagining things, he said aloud, because saying it made it real enough to examine. He hadn't seen Sheila in person in 3 weeks. Before that, there'd been another 3-week gap. 3 visits total in 2 months, all brief, all preceded by rescheduled plans and followed by vague apologies that never quite explained anything. She hadn't stopped caring, exactly. She'd stopped showing up. Taylor was not dramatic by nature. He didn't jump to conclusions or construct narratives out of feelings. He trusted patterns, data, repetition. When something drifted out of tolerance, he noticed. At 33, he'd learned the difference between patience and denial. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. There was a draft text already saved in his head. Something careful, something non-accusatory. Hey, I feel like we haven't been spending much time together. Is everything okay? He could send it now. He almost did. Instead, he locked the screen and set the phone face down. Let's see what happens, he murmured. This was the experiment. Taylor wasn't punishing Sheila. He wasn't testing her in the manipulative sense. He simply wanted to remove his own constant adjustment from the equation. For the past 2 months, he'd been the one rescheduling, accommodating, reassuring himself that relationships had seasons and this one just happened to be busy. He believed that, mostly, but relationships also required presence. And he was tired of pretending absence counted as a phase without an expiration date. So he decided, unless Sheila reached out, specifically intentionally with plans attached, he would stop orbiting around the empty space she'd left. He would live his life exactly as it was, without making room for something that might not return. If that meant the relationship dissolved quietly, then at least it would be honest. He finished his coffee, now lukewarm, and headed to work. The engineering floor hummed with its usual low-grade energy, keyboards, soft conversations. The distant whir of testing equipment. Taylor liked the predictability of it. Systems behaved according to rules. When they failed for reasons that could be understood. He slid into his chair and pulled up the schematic he'd left open the night before. Within minutes, he was absorbed, mind clicking into place as he traced connections, annotated margins, adjusted tolerances. Around 11, his phone buzzed. Sheila. Good luck today, smiling face with smiling eyes. Taylor stared at the message longer than necessary. Good luck with what? She didn't know what he was working on. She hadn't asked. The text wasn't wrong. It just wasn't connected to anything real. He typed back, thanks. Nothing more. He returned to his work, but the ease didn't come back right away. That evening, Taylor went home, changed, and cooked for one. He made lemon chicken and roasted vegetables, the kind of meal that usually prompted him to text Sheila a picture with a caption about having leftovers. He didn't. Instead, he sat at his small dining table and ate while listening to a podcast about infrastructure failures, bridges, power grids, the cost of ignoring maintenance until collapse became inevitable. Subtle, he muttered to himself. His phone buzzed again. Sheila, might grab drinks with the girls tonight. Long day. Taylor stared at the message. There was no question in it. No invitation. Just information, delivered after the decision had already been made. He typed. Deleted. Typed again. Finally responded, hope you have fun. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Sheila, you okay? Taylor leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. This was the part that made him tired. Not the distance, but the expectation that he reassure her about the distance. He replied, yeah, just taking it easy tonight. Which was true. And incomplete. And enough. Over the next 2 weeks, Taylor settled into a rhythm that surprised him. He stayed late at work when a design problem intrigued him instead of rushing home for a maybe plan. He accepted an invitation to join a small team exploring a new project. One that would put him closer to a leadership track he'd been quietly preparing for. He went to the gym consistently. He slept better. Sheila continued texting. Updates. Reactions. Surface-level affection that required nothing. They still hadn't seen each other. On a Thursday night, she canceled plans they'd made 5 days earlier. Sheila. I'm so sorry. Totally forgot I told Jenna I'd help her with something tonight. Rain check. Taylor read the message twice. He didn't feel angry. He felt clear. He replied, no worries. Take care. There was no follow-up question. No new date suggested. That night, Taylor stood in his living room. Lights off, city glow filtering through the windows. He thought about all the times he'd adjusted his expectations downward and called it compromise. Half measures, he said quietly. That's what this is. and he'd never been good at those. Taylor wasn't looking for a replacement. He wasn't lonely. What unsettled him was the realization that the relationship might already be over, and he was the last one still standing in it. He picked up his phone, opened his calendar, and filled his weekend with things he wanted to do. Not distractions, just life. If Sheila stepped back into it, fully and intentionally, he'd listen. If she didn't, well, the experiment was already running. Chapter 2, A Life with Open Space. Taylor discovered that free time was louder than he remembered. Not unpleasant, just noticeable. Like walking into a room after a machine had been switched off and realizing how much noise it had been making all along. On Friday afternoon, he shut down his workstation with deliberate care. He had stayed late 3 nights that week, not because anyone expected him to, but because the project had pulled at him in a way he trusted. A redesign of a municipal power distribution substation. Complex, layered, the kind of work where decisions echoed for decades. The kind of work that rewarded thinking things through before acting. "Hey, Kellus." He looked up to see Jonah Patel leaning against the divider, jacket already on, grin suggesting trouble or at least mild deviation from routine. "We're heading out for a drink," Jonah said. "Small group, end-of-week decompression. You in?" Taylor hesitated automatically, the reflex of a man used to checking an invisible calendar that revolved around someone else's availability. He didn't check his phone. "Sure," he said, surprising both of them. "Where?" The bar was one of those places that pretended not to be curated, mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, Edison bulbs, but had clearly been assembled with intention. Taylor liked it immediately. The group was small as promised. Jonah, Elise from Systems Integration, a woman Taylor didn't recognize, seated at the far end of the table, nursing a beer and listening more than she spoke. "That's Mara," Elise said, following his glance. "She's consulting with the city on the zoning side of the substation project." Mara looked up as if summoned by name, one eyebrow lifting. "Consulting makes it sound like I get paid to give opinions," she said. "I mostly tell people why their ideas won't survive contact with reality." Taylor smiled before he meant to. "I'm Taylor," he said. "Electrical. I do something similar, just with numbers instead of policies." "Policies are numbers in costumes," Mara replied. "Nice to meet you." Her handshake was firm, her expression alert but not guarded. She had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but claimed it quietly. Conversation flowed easily, moving from work to lighter topics without anyone forcing it. Taylor found himself speaking more than usual, not because he felt compelled to perform, but because he wasn't editing himself in anticipation of someone else's reaction. At one point, Jonah excused himself, and Elise was pulled into a conversation at the bar, leaving Taylor and Mara alone at the table. "So," Mara said, turning slightly toward him, "do you always look relieved when someone asks you a question? Or is that just tonight?" Taylor laughed, caught off guard. "That obvious? Only if you're paying attention." He considered that. "I think I've had a lot of open space lately. Good or bad?" "Undecided." Mara nodded, as if that were a perfectly reasonable answer. "Open space tends to reveal what you've been avoiding filling." "That sounds like a professional observation." "Urban planner," she said. "It's practically a diagnosis." Later that night, Taylor walked home instead of calling a ride. The air was cool, the city quieter than usual. His phone buzzed in his pocket. "Sheila, how was your day?" He stopped at a crosswalk, watching the light change. He typed, "Good. Went out with coworkers after work." There was a pause before her reply. "Sheila, oh nice. I ended up staying in. Exhausted." He waited, curious whether the conversation would go anywhere on its own. Didn't. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and continued walking. Saturday morning arrived without obligation. Taylor woke early out of habit, then lingered in bed longer than usual, listening to the city wake up. He made coffee, real coffee, not the rushed weekday version, and sat by the window with a book he'd been meaning to read for months. Midway through the second chapter, his phone buzzed. "Elise, a few of us are checking out the farmer's market later. You should come." He smiled. "Sure." At the market, the air smelled like citrus and bread and damp earth. Taylor wandered with the group, sampling olives, listening to Jonah argue cheerfully with a vendor about honey. Mara joined them halfway through, hair pulled back, sunglasses perched on her head. "You people move like you've got a system," she said. "I've been circling the same bread stall for 10 minutes. "Commitment issues," Jonah said. "It's a known flaw." Taylor and Mara fell into step together without comment. "So," she said, glancing at him, "any verdict on the open space?" "Still evaluating," he said. "But I'm starting to think it's necessary." "For what?" "For deciding what actually belongs there." She considered him for a moment, then nodded. "That tracks." They bought coffee and sat on a low stone wall watching people pass. The conversation meandered, work anecdotes, favorite cities, the quiet satisfaction of well-designed things. At one point, Mara said, "You're very intentional." Taylor blinked. "Is that a compliment?" "Yes," she said. "But I imagine it's also a burden." He smiled wryly. "I don't do half measures well. Most people don't notice when they're taking them." He looked at her then, really looked. There was no flirtation in her expression, just interest, curiosity without expectation. Felt safe, not dull, grounded. That evening, Taylor cooked again, this time with music playing and the windows open. He checked his phone once. No messages. He wasn't surprised. What surprised him was the absence of disappointment. Instead, there was a sense of alignment, as if something inside him had finally stopped compensating for imbalance. He thought about the way Mara listened, the way she spoke without filling silence for the sake of it, the ease of shared space without performance. He wasn't looking for anything, but he was paying attention, and for the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. If you're ready, I can continue with Chapter 3, where Taylor's experiment produces its first undeniable result and the cost of avoidance becomes visible. Chapter 3, Cancellation Culture. The fourth cancellation arrived on a Sunday evening, polite as ever. Taylor was halfway through prepping vegetables for dinner when his phone buzzed against the counter. He didn't reach for it right away. He finished slicing the onion, rinsed his hands, and only then picked up the phone, already knowing what it would say. Sheila. Hey love, I'm really sorry, but tonight's not going to work. Things kind of came up last minute. Can we reschedule? He read it once, then again slower. Reschedule implied a future date. History suggested otherwise. Taylor set the phone down and stared at the wall across from him, eyes unfocused. He wasn't angry. That was the strangest part. Anger would have been easier, something to push against, something to justify action. Instead, he felt a familiar professional sensation. The moment when you realized a system wasn't failing intermittently. It was operating exactly as designed. You just misunderstood its purpose. He typed back. Tonight was the reschedule. The message sent with a quiet finality that surprised him. The three dots appeared almost immediately, disappeared, reappeared. Sheila. What's that supposed to mean? Taylor exhaled slowly and leaned against the counter. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He wasn't even trying to have one. He just wasn't interested in pretending anymore. It means we made plans after the last cancellation. And now those plans are canceled too. There was a longer pause this time. Sheila. I said I'm sorry. You know things have been hectic. He nodded to himself. They had been. For her. He typed carefully, the way he did when documenting a decision he knew would be reviewed later. I do know. And I've been patient. But we haven't actually spent time together in weeks, Sheila. Texting isn't the same. The reply didn't come right away. Taylor turned back to the stove and finished cooking, movement steady, practiced. He plated the food, sat at the table, and took his first bite just as the phone buzzed again. Sheila. I didn't realize it bothered you this much. That, more than anything, settled something in him. He wrote, that's kind of the problem. They didn't talk after that. Not that night. Not the next day. Taylor didn't feel victorious. He felt oddly lighter, as if he'd finally stopped carrying something he'd assumed was part of the job. At work on Monday, the new project meeting ran long. Taylor found himself sketching possibilities on the whiteboard, fielding questions, pushing back where it mattered. At one point, his manager, Denise, watched him with a thoughtful expression. After the meeting, she lingered. You're comfortable leading this, she said. Taylor considered the word. I'm comfortable doing it right. She smiled. That's the right answer. That evening, Elise stopped by his desk. A few of us are grabbing dinner, she said. You free? Taylor checked his phone out of habit. No messages. I am, he said. Where? Mara was already there when they arrived, seated at a small table near the window. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, the expression easy, uncalculated. Hey, intentional guy, she said. Urban diagnostician, he replied, grinning. They ordered food, conversation overlapping and warm. Taylor noticed the way Mara asked questions that built on the answers instead of redirecting them. Not interrogative, curious, present. At one point, Elise and Jonah drifted into a heated debate about municipal budgets, leaving Taylor and Mara in a pocket of relative quiet. You seem steadier, Mara said, not accusing, just observing. Do I? Yeah, less split. He thought about that. I stopped trying to balance something that wasn't meeting me halfway. She nodded once. That'll do it. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching traffic slide past the window. I'm not great at guessing, Mara said eventually. But that sounds like a relationship thing. Taylor appreciated that she didn't soften it with unnecessary euphemisms. It is, he said. Or was. I'm still figuring out which. She didn't offer advice. She didn't commiserate with a story of her own. She simply said, that limbo's exhausting. Yes, he agreed, surprised by the relief of being understood without explanation. Later that night, Taylor walked home again, hands in his pockets, thoughts unhurried. His phone buzzed just as he reached his building. Sheila, I've been thinking about what you said. He closed his eyes briefly. Sheila, I didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't important. He typed, I believe that. And he did. Intent wasn't the issue. Impact was. There was a pause. Sheila, can we talk tomorrow? He stared at the message for a long moment. This was the reach out he'd been waiting for. The one that would tell him whether the experiment revealed a distraction or a conclusion. He realized something then, quietly, decisively. He wasn't bracing himself anymore. Yes, he replied. We can. The next evening, they met at a cafe halfway between their apartments. A place they'd chosen once because it was convenient and never reconsidered. Sheila arrived late, breathless, apologetic. She looked the same, stylish, animated, distracted. They ordered drinks. Saturday. I didn't know you were that unhappy, she said, twisting her cup between her hands. I wasn't, Taylor said gently. I was uncertain. She frowned. About us. About whether we were still doing this together. She sighed. I just needed space. I know, he said. But you didn't say that. You just disappeared. I didn't disappear. You did from my life, he said, not harshly. And I adjusted around it until I realized I was the only one adjusting. She looked at him, really looked, as if noticing something new. You've changed, she said. He smiled faintly. I stopped filling in the gaps. They sat in silence, the noise of the cafe filling the space neither of them rushed to close. I don't think I can give you what you're asking for right now, Sheila said finally. Taylor nodded. He'd known that before she said it. And I don't think I should keep accepting less than what I need, he replied. There were no raised voices, no accusations, just recognition. They finished their drinks. They hugged brief, careful, kind. When Taylor walked out into the evening, the city felt different. Not brighter, clearer. He wasn't grieving. He wasn't relieved. He was resolved. And as he headed home, he found himself thinking, not of what he'd lost, but of the quiet, unexpected ease of conversations that didn't require chasing, of open space, and of what now he was finally ready to let fill it. Chapter 4, The Almost Conversation. The strange thing about clarity was how quiet it was. Taylor had expected something sharper after the cafe, relief, grief, maybe a delayed punch of regret. Instead, the days that followed settled into place as if they'd been waiting for permission. He woke on Monday without the low-grade anxiety of anticipating a message that might never come. His phone stayed mostly silent. He didn't check it compulsively. At work, that calm translated into momentum. Walk with me, Denise said after their morning stand-up, already heading toward the stairwell. Taylor grabbed his notebook and followed. I'm putting you forward to co-lead the substation project, she said without preamble. Not officially yet, but functionally. He processed that. That's sooner than I expected. I know, she said, but you're already doing it. I just want the structure to match reality. Taylor smiled. I won't fake it. I know, Denise said again, like it was settled fact. That's why I trust you. That evening, he ran into Mara outside the building. Hey, she said, falling into step beside him. You look like someone just handed you responsibility. Is it that obvious? She grinned. Only because you're not panicking. They walked a block together before either of them slowed. Coffee? She asked, nodding toward a place across the street. I've got half an hour before I need to be somewhere. Taylor hesitated, not because he didn't want to, but because he noticed the hesitation itself. The old reflex, the internal check for obligations that no longer existed. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. Inside, the cafe hummed with late afternoon energy. They claimed a small table near the window. So, Mara said, stirring her drink. How did the talk go? He appreciated that she didn't ask with her, as if the identity of the other person mattered more than the impact. It ended, he said. Calmly. She nodded. Those are the hardest ones. Because you can't be mad? Because you have to be honest instead. He smiled at that. They talked easily about leadership, about the difference between readiness and willingness, about how people mistook discomfort for danger. At one point, Mara leaned back in her chair and studied him. You know, she said, this feels like an almost conversation. Taylor raised an eyebrow. Define almost. She shrugged. The kind where both people know there's something else they could be talking about, but neither of them is rushing it. He considered her words. I don't hate that. Good, she said. Neither do I. There it was. Not a confession. Not a promise. Just acknowledgement. And it was enough. 2 days later, Sheila texted him again. Sheila, I keep thinking about what you said. About adjusting. Taylor read it once, then set the phone down. He finished what he was doing, made tea, and only then replied. I think we both did the best we could with where we were. The dots appeared. Sheila, I miss you. He stared at the message longer this time. What he felt wasn't longing. It was recognition, for the version of himself that had wanted the relationship to be something it wasn't. I care about you, he typed. But I don't think missing is the same as moving forward. There was no immediate reply. He didn't wait for one. Friday night, the group gathered again. This time at Jonah's apartment. Music played softly, conversations overlapping. Taylor stood near the window with Mara, both of them watching the city lights flicker on. You ever notice, she said, how people rush to define things because they're afraid undefined means unstable? Taylor thought about half measures, about gaps filled with assumption. I think undefined just means unfinished, he said. And not everything needs to be finished immediately. She smiled at him then, warm, unguarded. I like how you think. He met her gaze, steady. I like how you listen. They didn't move closer. They didn't need to. Across the room, Jonah raised his glass. To progress, he declared. Messy, inconvenient, and worth it. Taylor lifted his in return. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't wondering what came next. He was exactly where he needed to be. Chapter 5, The Line in the Sand. Taylor realized he'd been waiting for permission he no longer needed. The thought came to him on a Wednesday morning while he stood in the shower, steam fogging the mirror, mind running through the day ahead. There was nothing momentous scheduled, no deadlines, no meetings that required special preparation. Just work he knew how to do, people he trusted, and an unfamiliar sense of internal alignment. He shut off the water and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, letting the quiet settle. The line had already been drawn with Sheila. Calmly, clearly, that part of his life was resolved. What remained unresolved wasn't confusion. It was intention. At work, the substation project accelerated faster than Taylor had anticipated. With Denise's implicit backing, decisions flowed through him more often, colleagues deferring without fuss. He didn't posture. He didn't rush. He asked better questions, listened longer, and committed only when he meant it. By late afternoon, Mara stopped by his desk. Do you have 5 minutes? She asked. I need to sanity check something before I send it to 3 people who will definitely overreact. Always happy to prevent overreaction, Taylor said, swiveling his chair. She leaned against the desk, laptop open, pointing out a zoning constraint that conflicted with a proposed access route. They talked it through efficiently, comfortably. When she closed her laptop, she didn't move away right away. You free after work? She asked. Taylor felt the moment crystallize. Not dramatic, just precise. I am, he said. Good, she replied. I owe you a coffee that doesn't come with a countdown timer. They chose a quieter place this time, a cafe that leaned into silence instead of fighting it. No music, soft light. Conversations kept low out of mutual respect rather than policy. They ordered, sat, and for a few minutes talked about nothing in particular. The day, the weather, small observations. Then Taylor set his cup down carefully. Mara, he said. She looked up, attentive. I want to be clear about something, he continued. Not because there's a problem, because I don't want there to be confusion. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. Engaged, present. Okay, she said. I've enjoyed spending time with you, he said, and I'm interested in seeing where that could go. Intentionally, not vaguely, not eventually. She studied him for a moment, eyes thoughtful rather than guarded. And? She prompted. And I'm not interested in half measures, he finished. If that's not where you are, that's fine. I just don't want to drift. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted. Mara smiled, slow, genuine. I was hoping you'd say something like that, she said, because I was running out of ways to not. He laughed quietly. That's reassuring. But, she added, holding up a finger, I want to be equally clear. He nodded. Please. I don't rush into things to fill space, she said. I like momentum, but I need it to be real. I'm not interested in being a transition. Taylor felt no defensiveness, only recognition. I'm not transitioning, he said. I'm choosing. She considered him, then nodded once. Then I'd like to see where this goes, she said. On purpose. The word landed between them, solid and welcome. Later that night, Taylor walked home alone, but not solitary. The city felt familiar again. Not something he was passing through, but something he belonged to. His phone buzzed as he reached his building. Sheila. Sheila. I hope you're doing okay. He didn't feel a surge of emotion. No ache, no resentment. Just a quiet gratitude that the chapter had ended cleanly. He typed, I am. I hope you are too. She replied a moment later. I am. Thank you for being honest with me. He paused, then sent, thank you for understanding. And that was that. He didn't archive the conversation immediately. He didn't need to. It no longer tugged at him. Saturday arrived bright and unhurried. Taylor met Mara at a bookstore she liked, one with narrow aisles and handwritten recommendation cards tucked beneath the shelves. They wandered without agenda, occasionally pulling books out to show each other passages or covers that sparked commentary. You annotate? Mara asked, flipping through one of his selections. Religiously, he said. Margins are for thinking out loud. She smiled. I like that. They ended up at a small table in the back with coffee and an uneven stack of purchases. This feels. Mara searched for the word. Deliberate, Taylor offered. Yes, she said. And easy. He nodded. Those two things don't have to be opposites. She looked at him over her cup. You really believe that? I do, he said. It's taken me a while to learn it. They talked until the afternoon thinned and the light shifted. There was no dramatic kiss, no cinematic turning point. Just warmth, laughter, a sense of mutual footing. As they stood to leave, Mara hesitated. Just so we're aligned, she said, tone light but eyes serious. I don't disappear when things get busy. Taylor smiled. Neither do I. They walked out together, steps in sync without trying. That evening, Taylor stood in his apartment, windows open, city air drifting in. He looked around at the life he'd built. Not perfect, not finished, but sound. He thought about the experiment he'd started weeks ago, the quiet decision to stop filling in the gaps for something that wasn't meeting him back. The result hadn't been loss. It had been clarity. And now, standing firmly on the right side of the line he'd drawn, Taylor felt something he hadn't expected to feel so soon. Ready. Chapter 6. Timing isn't everything. Opportunity rarely announced itself as such. More often, it arrived disguised as inconvenience. For Taylor, it showed up in the form of an email sent at 7:12 a.m. on a Thursday. Subject line bland enough to be ignored if he'd been looking for excuses. Substation project, revised scope discussion. He read it twice while his coffee brewed, the implications unfolding with measured clarity. The city had accelerated its timeline. Budget approvals had come through earlier than expected. The redesign phase would compress. Decisions that had been theoretical would now carry weight. Leadership, real leadership, would be required before anyone felt entirely ready. Taylor smiled faintly. Of course. By mid-morning, the conference room buzzed with overlapping conversations. Taylor stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, listening more than he spoke. When he did speak, the room settled. We don't need to rush every decision, he said calmly. But the ones we do make have to be reversible where possible. Denise watched from the far end of the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. After the meeting, she caught up to him in the hallway. You're stepping into this, she said. It wasn't a question. I am, Taylor replied. Carefully. She nodded. That's the only way that actually works. That evening, Taylor met Mara for dinner at a small neighborhood place neither of them had tried before. No expectations, no grand gestures, just food and time. She noticed the difference immediately. You're buzzing, she said, halfway through her meal. In a contained way. Big project shift, he said. More responsibility sooner than planned. And I said yes, she smiled. Of course you did. They ate for a moment in comfortable silence. I want to check in, Mara said, setting her fork down. Not because I'm worried. Because I don't want to assume. He met her gaze. Okay. You're stepping into something demanding, she said. I don't disappear when things get busy, but I also don't compete with them. I wouldn't ask you to, Taylor said immediately. And I don't want to be absent just because I'm occupied. She studied him. You're very good at naming things. I've learned it's better than hoping they sort themselves out. She laughed softly. That tracks. The next few weeks tested that intention. Taylor's days stretched longer. Meetings bled into evenings. He came home mentally tired in a way that felt earned rather than draining. He didn't cancel plans with Mara, but sometimes those plans shifted. Shorter dinners, walks instead of events, quiet nights that ended earlier than either of them might have preferred. What surprised him was how little strain it caused. One night, sprawled on his couch with takeout containers between them, Mara glanced at him and said, You know you don't need to entertain me, right? He smiled. I'm aware. Good, she said, because I like this version of us too. There was no accusation in her tone. No disappointment, just presence. Late one Friday, Taylor stood alone in the office, city lights reflecting off the windows. He stared at the finalized schematic on his screen, a decision point highlighted in red. This was the moment where he would normally pause, wait, gather more certainty. Instead, he leaned forward and made the call. The relief wasn't immediate, but it was real. That weekend, he and Mara took a day trip out of the city, no destination in mind. They talked about nothing and everything. Childhood habits, career pivots, the quiet fear of settling for something that almost worked. At some point, Mara said as they sat by the water, you realize timing isn't the thing you're waiting on. What is? Taylor asked. Alignment, she said. With yourself first. He thought about the experiment he'd started months ago, the quiet refusal to keep filling in gaps that weren't being met. I think you're right, he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, easy, unguarded. For the first time in a long while, Taylor didn't feel like he was balancing competing priorities. He felt like he was building something, layer by layer, intentionally. And this time, he wasn't waiting to feel ready before stepping forward. He was stepping forward because he was ready enough. Chapter 7, Pressure Points. The week everything tightened, Taylor slept less. Not because he was anxious, but because his mind refused to idle. The substation project had reached its most fragile phase. Implementation decisions layered atop one another, each choice narrowing the next. There was no catastrophic risk, no looming failure, but there was consequence. The kind that didn't announce itself until years later, when someone else inherited the outcome. Taylor liked that weight. It demanded presence. What he didn't like was how easily presence in one part of his life could crowd out another if he let it. On Tuesday, a minor issue escalated. It started as a supplier delay, routine, manageable, but by noon it had revealed a cascade of dependencies no one had fully mapped. Taylor stood in the conference room, marker uncapped, listening to overlapping explanations. Okay, he said finally, voice calm but firm. Pause. The room stilled. We're not solving this by talking faster, he continued. We're solving it by agreeing on what actually matters. He drew 3 columns on the board. Non-negotiable, flexible, unknown. Let's sort before we panic. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan, not perfect but real. People left lighter than they'd arrived. Denise caught his eye on the way out. You're holding the pressure well, she said quietly. I'm not avoiding it, Taylor replied. That helps. That night, Taylor realized he'd missed a message from Mara. Not ignored. Missed. He stood in his kitchen, jacket still on, phone in hand. Mara, running late tonight. Want a rain check or just do a walk instead? Sent an hour earlier. He checked the time, then typed quickly. Sorry, got pulled into something. A walk sounds great if you're still up for it. The reply came almost immediately. Still up. Meet you in 10. Relief washed through him. Not because she'd waited, but because he hadn't disappeared. They walked the familiar neighborhood route, the one that didn't require attention. Streetlights pooled on the pavement. The city exhaled around them. You okay? Mara asked after a few minutes. Yeah, he said. Just feeling the weight of things. She nodded. That happens when you stop floating. He glanced at her. Is that your professional opinion? Personal, she said. I floated. It's overrated. They walked in silence for a block. I want to say something, Taylor said. Not because there's a problem. Because I don't want one to grow unnoticed. She turned slightly toward him. Okay. This project matters, he said. And it's going to take more from me for a while. Not everything, but more. She waited. Let him finish. I don't want that to translate into absence, he continued. And I don't want you to feel like you have to accommodate around it. Mara stopped walking. Taylor stopped too, heart thudding. Not with fear, but with intention. She studied him for a moment, then smiled softly. Thank you for saying that out loud, she said. Here's my side. He nodded. I don't need constant access, she said. I need consistency. I need to know where I stand, even when we're busy. You do, he said immediately. She reached for his hand, squeezing once. Then we're good. The simplicity of it almost startled him. 2 days later, the pressure peaked. The city representative pushed back hard on a design choice Taylor had approved. The conversation turned sharp, then circular. Taylor listened, asked clarifying questions, then did something that surprised even him. He held the line. This is the right decision, he said evenly. I'm open to adjustments, but not reversals that introduce new risk. There was a long pause on the call. Finally, the representative said, all right, document it. When the call ended, Taylor leaned back in his chair, heart racing. Not with doubt, but adrenaline. He didn't feel reckless. He felt committed. That evening, he went to Mara's place for dinner. Nothing elaborate. Pasta. Wine. Familiarity. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table. You're doing the thing, she said. What thing? The one where you choose, she replied. Even when it would be easier not to. He smiled. You make it sound noble. I make it sound accurate. They finished eating, moved to the couch. No rush. No agenda. Taylor rested his head back and stared at the ceiling, the week's tension finally loosening. You know, he said, there was a time I thought commitment meant losing flexibility. Mara tilted her head toward him. And now I think it gives it direction. She smiled, warm and unguarded. That's a good trade. He turned toward her then, not urgently, not hesitantly, and kissed her. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was steady. Later, as he walked home under a sky dimmed by city light, Taylor thought about risk. Commitment didn't remove it. It sharpened it, gave it shape, made it worth taking. He unlocked his door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him with a quiet certainty. For the first time, the pressure he felt wasn't something to endure. It was something he had chosen. And that made all the difference. Chapter 8, No Half Measures. The long view didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, quiet moments that accumulated until Taylor noticed the pattern forming beneath them. On a Monday morning, Denise stopped by his desk and set a folder down without ceremony. City signed off, she said. Full approval. Implementation moves forward as designed. Taylor exhaled. A slow release he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Nice work, she added. You handled this like someone who understands consequences. He smiled. I tried to. She tilted her head, considering him. You didn't try. You did. When she walked away, Taylor sat back in his chair, hands resting on the desk, letting the moment settle. It wasn't triumph that filled him. It was something steadier, earned. That evening, he met Mara at a small park tucked between buildings, a place people passed through without noticing unless they were looking for it. She was already there, sitting on a low wall, shoes kicked off, reading. She looked up when she heard him approach and smiled, unguarded. Hey, she said. Hey. They walked slowly, the path looping them back toward the entrance without urgency. "You're lighter," she observed. "The project crossed a line today," he said. "From fragile to real." She nodded. "That's always a good shift." They sat on a bench, shoulders brushing. Comfortable. Chosen. "I've been thinking," Mara said after a moment. Taylor turned toward her. "Dangerous phrase." She laughed. "Only mildly. About us." He waited, heart steady. "I like how we move," she continued. "No rushing. No drifting. Just forward." "That's intentional," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm saying this." She faced him fully now. "I don't need guarantees," she said. "But I want to name what we're doing. We're building something. Not testing. Not killing time." Taylor felt the truth of it settle into place. "Yes," he said simply. "We are." She smiled, eyes soft. "Good." A week later, Taylor stood in his apartment, box cutter in hand, surveying the stack of unopened boxes that had lived in his closet since his last move. "About time," he muttered. He worked methodically, unpacking books, old tools, things he'd kept but never placed. The act felt symbolic without trying to be. He wasn't making space for someone else. He was claiming space for himself. His phone buzzed. "Mara. Still on for dinner?" He smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." Dinner turned into hours. Conversation drifted from mundane logistics to larger questions. What they wanted, what they feared repeating, what they'd learned the hard way. "I used to think patience meant waiting," Taylor admitted at one point. "Like if you didn't push, things would sort themselves out. And now I think patience is paying attention," he said. "And acting when the signal's clear." Mara nodded. "That explains a lot about you." He raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "You don't avoid risk," she said. "You just refuse to pretend it isn't there." He considered that. "I think pretending costs more." She smiled. "Agreed." Later, as they stood by the window, city lights spread beneath them, Mara leaned against him. "Do you ever worry?" she asked quietly. "That being this deliberate takes some of the romance out of things?" Taylor thought about it, not defensively but honestly. "No," he said. "I think it makes room for it." She turned to him, curious. "When everything's vague," he continued, "you're always guessing, performing, protecting. But when things are clear, you can relax into them." She smiled slowly. "That's convincing." He kissed her then, not because the moment demanded it but because it fit. Weeks passed. Life continued. Taylor stepped fully into his new role, not perfectly but competently. He learned where to lean on others, where to hold firm. He made mistakes and corrected them without panic. With Mara, things deepened not explosively, but steadily. Shared routines emerged. Sunday mornings. Grocery lists written in tandem. A toothbrush at his place that didn't feel symbolic so much as practical. One evening, as they cooked together, Mara glanced at him. "You're very comfortable with commitment," she said. He laughed softly. "I didn't used to be." "What changed?" He thought back to the quiet experiment, to the decision to stop filling in gaps that weren't being met. "I stopped accepting half measures," he said. "From myself included." She nodded. "That'll do it." On a crisp fall night, Taylor found himself walking the same route he'd walked months ago, phone in his pocket, city familiar around him. Only this time he wasn't waiting for a message. He wasn't measuring absence. He was going home, to a life he'd chosen deliberately piece by piece. When he unlocked his door, Mara was already inside, music playing softly as she sorted through mail. "You're late," she said, smiling. "I know," he replied, setting down his bag. "But I got here." She crossed the room and kissed him, brief and certain. Later, as they settled in, Taylor thought about readiness, the word he'd built so much of his life around. He'd learned that readiness wasn't a finish line. It wasn't a feeling you waited for until all doubt vanished. Readiness was the decision to show up fully, without pretending, without holding back. No half measures. And as the city hummed outside and the quiet of home wrapped around him, Taylor Kellus knew, without drama, without doubt, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. And epilogue. Mara, I didn't fall for Taylor all at once. It happened in increments, the way you notice a city you've lived in for years has quietly become home. At first, it was how he listened. Not the polite, nodding kind of listening that waited for its turn, but the kind that adjusted course based on what it heard. That alone set him apart. Most people talked like they were sketching over a map they'd already decided on. Taylor redrew the map when the terrain changed. Then there was his consistency. Not predictability, consistency. He showed up the same way whether things were easy or demanding. Busy didn't make him vanish. Uncertainty didn't make him evasive. When he said he'd call, he did. When he didn't know, he said so. That sounds simple. It isn't. I dated men who chased intensity and called it passion. Men who confused spontaneity with depth. Taylor never rushed me, never performed urgency to prove interest. He chose, repeatedly, out loud. That mattered more than flowers or grand gestures ever could. The night I realized I trusted him completely was unremarkable. We were making dinner. He was tired, bone-deep tired, but still present, still himself. No resentment, no withdrawal, Just honesty. I've got a long week, he said, stirring a pot like it required the same care he gave everything else. But I'm here. And he was. I think people underestimate how romantic that is. Taylor doesn't promise what he can't guarantee. He doesn't future-cast in sweeping declarations. What he offers is something rarer, alignment. With himself. With me. With the life he's building on purpose. I don't wonder where I stand. I don't fill in gaps with hope or fear. There's no guessing game, no emotional static. There's just forward motion. Deliberate. Real. No half measures. And for the first time in my life, that feels like everything.